a record amount of spending on education, it's not necessarily going to the schools, and that's what causes the problem. So both sides have some facts, it's just how the public perceives them.
Chris, the Democrats have been, solid on this. One of the things that they pointed out after, finally, one of the things that I've always been surprised at is it took, and it's kind of been almost his emblem, it took Tom Corbett, 3 years to try to deliver his own story. He allowed everyone else to basically paint the picture of, hey, he's the guy who cut $1 billion out of education.
Well, that's exactly right. And you can't make up in 3 weeks of campaign ads 3 years of not using the bully pulpit, of not even just having a conversation with the Pennsylvanians and saying, look, this is the situation, this is what I inherited, this is what we did, here's the story. He's never been a communicator. He's never articulated the message, and education, more than anything else, has just buried him. And that narrative was written 3 years ago, and that is one of the major reasons why, he's not going to be able to come out on top.
One of the things that struck me specifically after the first debate, I remember saying to myself, where has this guy been for 3 years? It was startling to me because I thought he actually did quite well in the debates, and in fact, almost seemed like he put Tom Wolf a little bit on the retreat there. Is that just a part of his personality, Wes?
Well, what's so funny about that was he actually said, maybe I haven't gotten my message across well enough, right, during the debate. I think it's just the prosecutor in him. I think he's more of a prosecutor than he is a politician. I don't think he rose through the ranks the same way a guy like Ed Rendell did.
Right.
And he's not as good at that kind of retail politics as some governors are.
And the other thing is that, when you want to talk about a PR machine and a person who knows image and how to go about presenting things, it probably didn't help him to be following Ed Rendell. I mean, I don't think we're going to see Tom Corbett jumping into pools with any little kids anytime soon. But let's take a look at the county in terms now. We ran another story that appeared in the Sunday Times just last weekend. The interesting thing is that the county continues to drift away from what has always been a bastion of GOP power. The truth of the matter is now that there are, in fact, more registered Democrats in the county than there are Republicans. That gap is getting a little wider. An influx of people that are coming into the county and bringing with them Democratic roots with them. And yet one of the things that we pointed out that Andy Riley, the chairman of the county Republican Party, is always pointing out that when you gauge people who actually vote, who actually get to the polls, the GOP still has a slight margin. And I suppose now what you're talking about really are those two machines, Republican and Democrat, on Election Day, pushing people out to the poll. In light of that, in light of those numbers, does it almost become a little bit advantageous to see things getting a little more competitive, whereas the opposite of that, you could have had people say, hey, look, this thing's being decided, why bother to go out and vote? Whereas now it seems like that, at least with the hint of it being a contested race, it could drive more people to the polls.
Yeah, I definitely think it's the advantage to the Democrats to have this race be a little bit more competitive. Mm-hmm. What's not going to happen is the independents will not show up, right? So you're driving your base. These types of elections do not bring the independents out. So it's who can you get to the polls, and if you can get your people to the polls, and that's why you'll see Barack Obama coming in and Michelle Obama coming in, because they appeal to the people here in the Southeast.
Right. Chris, this is I guess, a little different view for the county Republican Party. They're looking at where these numbers are going in the county. They realize now that when you look at the county as a whole, they no longer have the huge. It wasn't that long ago when they had a 3-to-1 advantage in the county, and they wielded that power immensely. They've clearly been very, very successful in keeping their grip on the county courthouse. It's been almost impenetrable to Democrats, and yet we see glimpses. You see, especially on the eastern end of the county in Upper Darby, we've seen races there. When Mario Severa left the State House, that state legislative seat went to the Democrats. We've seen in particular in presidential races that they have, the county has started moving Democratic. That obviously is something that has to be on the minds of the Delco GOP.
Absolutely. Delaware County's not gone Republican for president since 1988.
Right.
And that's a long time. And you're right, it is definitely trended to the Democrats. The Republicans still have a very well-oiled machine. They can still generate, voter turnout, better than most out there. But what has to be disconcerting is when you look 4 years ago, it's the biggest Republican year since 1946 nationwide. And Tom Corbett and Pat Toomey, who both obviously won, both lost Delaware County.
Right.
So if you're losing that as the gubernatorial candidate in the best year, and clearly you're going to lose now, that the question is how much will Corbett lose and how much will that drag down the rest of the GOP slate in Delaware County, and will it be enough to sink a number of the other candidates? That's going to be the big question.
It seems to me that obviously a lot of people are focused on the Philadelphia suburbs, especially in terms of the governor's race. The fact of the matter is the trend that is happening here in Delaware County, those numbers are being carried out in Montgomery County, Bucks County. The only place that still holds a fairly substantial GOP majority is Chester County. Why is it that the governor, he can't make up that kind of margin in other parts of the state? Is he landlocked? He's got to have X amount of votes here from the southeast?
Well, we account for about a third of all the votes in the state.
Yeah.
And, if you take a look at kind of the electoral map, it's possible to win this state by only winning about 6 counties.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Right.
throw a southeastern PA, you throw in Erie, you throw in Allegheny, and
Right.
maybe Luzerne, and that's all that you need in the
Yeah.
state. So, and the problem is that the rest of the state, again, with the problem with the conservatives that he's having,
Right.
if he had his base locked up, then you could say, okay, we can come into the southeast and we can, we can just pick off a couple votes, maybe we can win. But
Right.
he hasn't consolidated his base.
Right.
So.
Chris, I know that you've espoused on any number of occasions that there was an issue that was, rooted in the Jerry Sandusky investigation and the way Tom Corbett, as Attorney General, handled that investigation. It hasn't really been talked about that much, but you still think that that's in people's minds?
I do. You know what, Phil? I think it's one of those issues that's not really being polled right now. And again, because the race is maybe a foregone conclusion, that's why a lot of your big national polling firms out of your media outlets have not really polled it here because they're looking elsewhere. But Jerry Sandusky and the way that it was handled is still gets a lot of people very, very upset.
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania has one of the largest alumni networks of any state in the country in terms of Penn State
Yeah.
alumni. Half of those people think he put Joe Paterno in his grave prematurely. The other half believe he left the child molester on the street way too long for political reasons.
Mm-hmm.
They've been salivating now for a number of years to get their revenge on Tom Corbett. And I think it's not just Jerry Sandusky in and of itself, but a much broader issue is if you can't trust this guy to run a competent campaign where there's still so many questions that people do deserve answers to, he won't answer those questions, then how can he be trusted to run the state? And I think you've seen with all the way the state's been, that's why he's down.
Right.
So, there's
Sure.
one really interesting fact. If you take a look at the primary election in Center County, which is where State
Right,
College is
yeah.
located, there were 8,000 people who wrote in a candidate other than Tom Corbett in the Republican primary there.
There you
And
go.
that gives you a little bit of an idea of how this is hurting
Yeah.
him.
Well, one of the things that sort of has struck me in this campaign, and I'll gauge both of your opinions on this and see if it holds true with you as well. I get this distinct feeling that an awful lot of people in this state are not necessarily voting for Tom Wolf, but there's a lot of people in this state who are going to vote for anybody who's not named Tom Corbett.
Yes.
You think that?
That's the short of it. And the Democrats nominated the perfect candidate to be the not Tom Corbett,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, here's Tom Wolf, a very mild-mannered person who could not upset anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, he's very likable person.
Yeah.
He's somewhat bland, which is exactly what you want to run in a campaign
Yeah.
where you're running against a very unpopular incumbent.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
But absolutely. I mean, I concur. There's, from the beginning, it became anyone but Corbett.
Yeah.
And
right.
and I think you still see that now. And again, as a businessman, Tom Wolf's business resume does interest a lot of people. And people are saying, you know what, it's time to run government like we run a business, a little bit more efficiently,
Yeah.
cut out some of the waste. Hey, maybe a business guy can do it. And I think those credentials have won over a number of Republicans as well, as some of the polls
Right.
show.
All right, let's turn to probably what is, in fact, aside from the governor's race, maybe the most talked about race in the state, and that is this race for the open state Senate seat in the 26th district, which encompasses a lot of Delaware County, a sliver of Montgomery and Chester County as well. And that was created by the fact that a longtime Republican Senator Ted Erickson is retiring, and that pits the Republican chairman of Delaware County Council, Tom McGarrigle, against Union leader John Kane from Ridley Township. And again, here you see a very, very stark shadow over this by the governor's campaign, by the fact that the Republican candidate, the chairman of Delaware County Council, basically came out on day one of this campaign and said, I'm basing my campaign on enactment of a 4% or 5% or 4 or 5% extraction tax on the drillers in the Marcellus Shale area. I want to use every dime of that to education. Probably not exactly what Tom Corbett needed to hear, Wes.
No, it wasn't. But you know, if you're going to appeal to a very kind of competitive district, you have to appear not to be overly ideological.
Yeah.
You have to be a can-do person, a person, you know, McGarrigle's basically running on the fact that I can run government efficiently and well. And as a consequence of that, you know, one way is to say, look, let's tax these oil companies that are taking out our natural resources, and let's take that money and put it towards education.
Yeah.
Right? That's a win-win to suburban voters.
Right. Chris, one of the things that got pointed out, obviously there's no way to